Super. Okay, so we just missed the first 2 minutes.
Splice that in.
Yeah, I'll just splice it in. I'll just and I'll have dubbed in audio.
Green screen.
Yeah, exactly. I'll green screen in the basement. That sounds good. In addition to working on the spot work, I've done a lot of open source related to JavaScript. Anyone here use GitHub or do any kind of open source stuff? A few people? Okay, great. So we're going to talk a little bit about some open source things too, and a little bit of Git might rub off on you in this talk as well. So I've got 3 goals. Boy, I shouldn't have run. The first goal is basically for you guys to see that getting started with TypeScript is simple. So since most of the folks in the room kind of wanted to talk about this, why don't we talk about what TypeScript is? So we know what JavaScript is, right? It's something xyz.js, right? And so I have a web page, and I need to have some dynamic functionality on the web page, so I'm going to go ahead and create a script tag on there, and I'm going to point it at a file called, we'll just make it up, xyz.js that lives in my server, and there'll be some JavaScript code in there, and then hopefully, if all goes well, it'll execute when my page gets loaded up. So JavaScript is a dynamic language, meaning that when you assign something to a variable, it'll work. Whatever you want to stick in there is totally fine. And that's great in terms of being very flexible, but it's also troublesome once your applications tend to grow past a certain size because it becomes very difficult to reason about exactly how things work and what the structure of your code is, and refactoring gets to be very difficult. In fact, it's been said that at the larger JavaScript code base grows, the more read-only it becomes, because people tend to start to feel fearful of refactoring it. And even with unit tests, things can certainly slip through. So that's, in a nutshell, what situation we find ourselves in when we're thinking about implementing TypeScript. And then we download TypeScript and we run this thing called TSC. Anyone want to guess? TypeScript? Compiler. Hey, everybody knows. Very good. So we've got xyz.js and we run it through TSC. Actually, that's not going to work. So what we're going to do is, instead of that, we're going to use a command that Microsoft implemented probably in the 1980s or so, which was how do you rename a file? Red star.js star.ts. Now it's really forward-thinking of Microsoft to have implemented this command so long ago with this explicit intention of having it be used for creating TypeScript files out of JavaScript files, but sure enough, that's how we roll. So now I've got xyz.ts, and now I run that through TSC. Great. What spits out on the other end?
Would be JavaScript. JavaScript.
I heard xyz.js. Now, isn't TypeScript great? That doesn't make any sense. Okay, so what does this mean? It's not just about renaming files and running command line tools. So what TypeScript does is it adds extra stuff. Okay, right? It adds extra stuff to the JavaScript language. It allows me to do a number of things, and I'm going to show you a bunch of stuff, but among the highlights is that it adds strong typing. And it adds things that are related to strong typing like interfaces, which is my favorite part. And it also adds things like classes and some other kind of sugar for various things. And it enables a number of things. Because we were able to strongly type our code, it means that Visual Studio and any other IDE, because of course this is an open source project, and it's implemented in such a way where a number of other IDEs have provided in-editor experiences for TypeScript, like, for example, Sublime is one that a lot of people use. The JetBrains one, the name escapes me. WebStorm, thank you. So you can use TypeScript with any of these editors, or you can use a regular text editor. Notepad is perfectly fine. And get a pretty good experience. So anyway, that's the basic gist. You take your TypeScript file, you convert it to a TS just by renaming it. Then you run TSC, or your editor might do that for you, and we'll use Visual Studio, which does that automatically for you today. And then you get it back out, a JS file, except that it's different. Now it's been converted back into JavaScript if you had been an expert the way you would have programmed it yourself, which is to say, the way I would never have programmed it. But it makes a lot more sense when it's in TypeScript, and I'll let the compiler worry about JavaScript. So anyway, in a nutshell, that's TypeScript. So I want you to see that getting started with TypeScript is simple. That's it, basically. Maybe downloading an update for Visual Studio or some other thing like that. But I want you also to be aware of TypeScript's good parts, interfaces, and bad parts, which I'll talk about later. And if you can embrace the good parts, especially around interfaces and typing and things like that, but without going overboard, and avoid some of the bad parts, you're going to have a really good experience. In the last little bit is that I want to make sure you have a sense that TypeScript's benefits outweigh its costs. So the compilation step for JavaScript is saving it to disk. The compilation step for TypeScript is either running it through TSC, or having some extra stuff set up inside of Visual Studio that will take a little bit of CPU, take a little bit of extra calculation, has to check everything, and potentially as your system grows, that can take a little bit longer. So you do have to be aware that sometimes you have to weigh that cost of time. So I'll let you in on a little secret. Steve was going to invite the world's best JavaScript developer, but she wasn't available, so he got me instead. So I'm not the world's best JavaScript developer, but I'm a lot better with TypeScript. TypeScript has helped me learn JavaScript by example. How many people have read JavaScript The Good Parts? Anyone? Okay, a bunch of people. Okay, great. So there's a guy who I'll talk about a little bit later, Douglas Crawford, who wrote this book called JavaScript The Good Parts. And his basic idea was JavaScript. Well, there's a funny picture. I'll tell you this first. There's two books. One of them is called JavaScript The Definitive Guide, and it's about this thick. And then there's JavaScript The Good Parts, which is about that thick. And actually, it's probably a little bit less. So that's sort of funny to me. And that's viewed from the side, of course. Anyway, the idea that Douglas Crawford presented was, hey, there are some bad parts to JavaScript, but if you only use the good parts, in fact, it is a fantastic language. And there are, in fact, it's much, much better than the whole language as a whole, just the good parts. They are greater than the rest. And it's a really fascinating book, quite interesting. And a lot of the stuff that he put forward about ways to write JavaScript better than kind of the way you would expect if you just read the feature manual, is how the TypeScript compiler team made the TypeScript compiler output JavaScript. So basically, if you just use simple TypeScript idioms, they become the sort of JavaScript The Good Parts way of writing JavaScript. So you basically get superpowers by not having to kill yourself. It's just great. I love this kind of language. So anyway, it's helped me learn JavaScript by example too, because then you can look at the JavaScript and say, oh, that's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. But sure enough, it works. So that's great. And I talked about this a little bit too, but TypeScript helps me refactor my code easily. Right in the IDE, I can right-click rename, find all references, all that stuff that you can't do with regular JavaScript because it's too dynamic. And then here's sort of the humble part of this. I know for a fact that Waffle, the web accessible fitting library for Eve thing that I wrote, I know it's spelled wrong, it wouldn't exist without TypeScript. I just wouldn't have been smart enough to reason about all the calculations that I needed to make to properly fit internet spaceships with regular JavaScript. I had to use something like TypeScript that helped me out. So let's begin. So getting started with TypeScript. You can convert JavaScript to TypeScript with this one weird trick, just like those ads, and we already talked about this. So about a year ago, I was at work, told my boss, hey, I'm gonna work on something important today. I'm going to try out this new language, and it's going to be awesome. It's going to be great. I can't wait for this. It's TypeScript. It means that we can reason about our JavaScript. It's not, you know, it's not 2004 anymore. You know, we can use a proper language, and we'll check this thing out. And I know Anders wrote it, by the way. So Anders, who knows who Anders Heilsberg is? Okay, great. So he's the sort of the guy who invented C#. You know, he sort of invented Turbo Pascal. You know, he's pretty famous around here. So he's the essentially figurehead of the TypeScript project. So if he wrote it, it's got to be great, right? So I go ahead and I say, fire up Visual Studio. Okay, I've got my project open. You guys have all seen your project, right? There's a bunch of JavaScript files in there. And I'm just going to type in rename JavaScript to TypeScript. And this is what I got. That's a problem. How many people have had more than 356 errors at a time? Okay, so, well, everybody, right? Okay, so, I mean, like, okay, when you goof, it can happen.
Refactoring goes horribly wrong.
Yeah, exactly. You probably get this in JavaScript a lot. So that's not cool. But one of the things that I didn't realize, at least at first, when I first did this, was that in TypeScript, there's actually two kinds of errors. There's the you goofed, and for example, there's a missing closed parenthesis or brace or something, like stuff that's essentially impossible to compile, right? And of course, that you have to fix. There's nothing that is going to fix that for you, probably. But then there's type errors. So this is kind of a neat thing. And it's also kind of annoying. So this is the first bad part I'm going to tell you about. TypeScript, if it finds a type error, which is to say I have a variable that TypeScript thinks is a number, and I try to assign a string to it, TypeScript will throw an error. But it's not an error that will prevent compilation. It's just sort of an error, I guess. And they kind of call that type errors. So now if you saw this 356 errors in Visual Studio, you would think that you wouldn't, if like in C#, for example, program wouldn't compile, and you get that stupid dialog that says, hey, you're dumb. Do you want to run the old version of the program that the smart guy before you wrote? And you always say no, and then you battle against your keyboard, right? So with TypeScript, though, you would get this, and it would run no problem. It would just be JavaScript instead of TypeScript, which is a bit weird. So you have to reason about that. My opinion is these should be warnings, but I guess I kind of understand why they did this. Because they want you to have it be right. So anyway, just be aware about this in TypeScript. This is a bit of a funny thing. So we're going to do an initial demo. It's a basic HTML page. It's got jQuery on it. Who likes jQuery? Yeah, oh yeah, jQuery. It's got inline JavaScript. Who likes inline JavaScript? Someone admitted it. They like inline JavaScript. We're doing this inside Visual Studio, okay? So let's begin. Okay, very good. By the way, these are 3 battleships firing on 2 targets. This took at least 6 people to make, including the one taking the screenshot. I think that's pretty amazing. Anyway, let's fire up Visual Studio. Okay, I'll make sure I'm on the right branch. My project. Great. Excellent. Okay, high def. Great, so here's my project. And I'll just start this up to show you real quick. This is a very advanced web page. Here's a table, right? Because I'm from the 2000s. And I have this thing where you click calculate. So if I'm buying a mouse and it's $45 and I'm buying only one of them and it's 8.75% tax, $48.94. How about that? It's amazing. JavaScript is incredible. Okay, so let's take a look at how that works. I have this file called default CSHTML. It's a Razor page. And you can see I've got this, let me go ahead and zoom in here. Can everyone see okay? Oops.
More zoom.
More zoom. Okay, well, how about I do, maybe I can do this. Oops, no, that's not good.
Yeah, that's good.
How's that? Okay. So, oops, jeez. Yes, I definitely wanted to rip that off a little bit. Okay, even better. And we'll move this guy out of the way, and then we'll be ready. Okay, great. So as you can see, I've got this table. I've got a bunch of fields on my HTML form, and then I've got this JavaScript down here. And so what's wrong with this? What are some problems with this code? Anyone want to hazard a guess? I've already identified one of them. Go ahead.
Yeah, separate your JS into new file and then put script.
Right. Okay. So I have my JavaScript file right on my HTML file, and that's a problem for a number of reasons. One of which is that I can never have caching independent of my page, which might be dynamic, and a few other stylistic reasons. I can't really necessarily compile it separately. I certainly can't convert it to TypeScript like this. Any other ideas about what might be wrong with this JavaScript? Well, I suppose that could be a problem if you were trying to have like a library that you'd be passing in all the things you need and then just returning a pure result. I suppose that's true from a functional perspective. Anybody else?
Your variables are defined globally?
Yes, I have global variables here. So if I have any other JavaScript from pretty much any other source on my page, you think there's any JavaScript out there that uses a variable called name or a price or a quantity? Yeah, probably that's true. Any other things? One more that I'm looking for. Doing math with money in JavaScript. And that's really, really, really bad. Shame on you if you use doubles, which is what all numbers in JavaScript are, floating point numbers to deal with money. Anyway, but of course, bad me wrote this code, so it's what it is. By the way, if anyone wants to use a nice library to do proper math in JavaScript, check out big.js. It's a nice little library. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and refactor this. Go to my scripts folder here, and I'm just going to go ahead and do add and JavaScript file. And I'm going to call this checkout. Checkout dot, oh my goodness, .js. It is true, you can't type when people are watching. And I'm going to go ahead and select this code here. And this is very exciting. Cut and paste and save it. And I wish the view would stay the same size. And I'm going to save this, and now this is broken. We're just going to do src equals. And we're going to do scripts and Visual Studio checkout.js. Go ahead and save that. And now this is going to still work. I'm not going to bother showing you, but just trust me. This is still good code. So now at least I've refactored my JavaScript. And this is not anything to do with TypeScript. This is just general best practices with regards to JavaScript development on the web. So let's go ahead and make this TypeScript file. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this guy. And I'm going to hit F2. Again, Microsoft also designated the fact that there should be F keys. And the second one should be reserved for converting JavaScript into TypeScript. That was IBM, in fact. They did that in collaboration with IBM. So we're going to do checkout.js. We're actually going to do checkout.ts and hit enter. And it's going to say, hey, you don't know how to use Windows 95. If you change an extension, that's bad. I'm going to say, I don't care. And then, oh, your project has been configured to support TypeScript. Isn't that great? And ask me if I want to go up to NuGet, which I will in a minute, but for now I'm going to say no. So there is a little bug. This is another bad part. It's probably a Visual Studio bug more than it is a TypeScript bug, but when you rename the file, it kind of realizes it's TypeScript, but not really. So the very first time, the instant you rename it, you have to close the file and then open it up again, and then it'll be happy. So on the left-hand side, let me go ahead and see if I can zoom in again. Oh my goodness, how's that? Ooh, that's pretty good. On the left-hand side, I have my TypeScript. Now, this is something that Web Essentials gives you. Who uses Web Essentials here? Anybody? There's a handful of people. Okay, great. So if you do any web development and you use Visual Studio to do that web development, I highly recommend you go to vswebessentials.com and download the Web Essentials plugin for Visual Studio. It's written by a guy named Mads Christensen. And it's quite excellent. It gives you a number of special features for CSS and JavaScript and TypeScript and Less and Sass and CoffeeScript and just a number of other different webby type things. So anyway, Web Essentials. Web Essentials.
Visual Studio gallery.
Ah, very good. It's in the gallery. So you can go right from the extensions
Yeah, you can
tab, right?
use
So,
the extensions.
so yeah, I can just go into Tools and go in here. And by the way, you know why my menus come off to the left? Did you know if you have a touch screen, this happens by default? I'm not aware of a way to turn this off. Does anyone know how to turn this off?
What's that now?
See how my menu is going to the left instead of being where it would normally be? Like, it's normally like here, right? Because Tools is selected, but it's here. And it's because if you are using a touchscreen, you might want to use your thumb. And I think that's kind of clever, but it's also really annoying.
Are you sure it's consistent with the case? I got a touchscreen on my laptop. I would swear that doesn't happen. I'll have to experiment, but
That's what Bing said.
really.
So take it up to Mr. Bing.
If you open it, that's fine. Just you have a touch on the device.
Well, I didn't use my finger to
You
use.
use your finger on the screen to open
Right.
it.
I don't think I did. I don't remember doing so. I don't know. Maybe. I'll blame it, maybe Mr. Bing. I'm not blaming Asus, I'm not really sure. But anyway, if I go in here, you can probably do online and search for it, I guess, Web Essentials. Anyway, I've got it installed, and I've actually got a nightly of it. So I'm using Visual Studio 2013 Update 3 release candidate, which is technically not release software. And I'm also using a nightly of Web Essentials. Both have pretty good bug fixes for TypeScript. So while I strongly recommend you to give this a shot if you have Update 2 installed for Visual Studio 2013, or if you have any text editor and want to download Node, which I'll show you later, there's a couple of fixes coming along the line that help with performance and performance. So anyway, it's a lot faster with Update 3. Anyway, so it says over here, not compiled to disk yet, and sadly, I'm sorry, I can't really zoom that in much more than using the magnifier, but you see over here, not compiled to disk yet. That's Web Essentials. How do I compile TypeScript? Take a guess? Save it. And hit save. Hooray, it worked. And over on the right-hand side, I have exactly the same file I had before, except now it is JavaScript again, after I renamed it, okay? So I haven't really done anything useful yet. But there is something interesting. I have some red squigglies. And as we know, as developers, especially if we're using Visual Studio, we don't like red squigglies. So, what could that mean? Could not find symbol $. Anyone have any ideas? What's $, usually? JQuery, right. So, it can't find jQuery. Well, I'm loading jQuery on the page. So what could it be? Well, it turns out that the way that TypeScript reasons about JavaScript libraries is by using what's called a definitions file. So out on the web, so when TypeScript came out, they said, hey, here's this language, we're not really sure if this is going to be cool or not yet, we kind of like it. And here's the definitions file for jQuery, and we pretty much documented all the APIs for jQuery, and that's pretty much it. So if you want to use jQuery, you're good, and if you don't, you kind of have to figure it out yourself. And shockingly, people did. This is the amazing part of it. So I'm going to go up to this website, and it's called Definitely. One of the best parts about using TypeScript is you finally learn how to type definitely. DefinitelyTyped.org. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it. That's okay. Bing saved me. Definitely TypeScript.org. Thank you, Mr. Bing. That's twice. This is a website. It's a repository for high-quality TypeScript definitions. Now, I've written some of them, so I know for a fact that is false. But generally, other than the ones that I've written, they're quite good. And so if I click on the link, I can go into GitHub. And this is the main repo homepage. And let's see, it starts with accounting.js. God, can you imagine writing accounting.js? And it's going to go all the way down. These are all the JavaScript files that have really good high-quality types. And that's a lot. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds. By the way, there are multiple geez. There are multiple pages of jQuery ones. I don't know if you guys can see that. But here's the one I want, jQuery. There's a definitions file. So all of the APIs of jQuery, so $ open parenthesis, whatever, are in these files. And by the way, it also has jQuery UI and all of the other sort of jQuery related things, and pretty much any other JavaScript library you might be aware of. Definitely typed. By the way, I want to make sure that if anyone wants to take notes, certainly feel free to do so. I'm going to be posting a link to my website at the end. And on that website, within a day or two, I will have all of the links for all the different things that I've talked about, plus some additional content that is in my slides graveyard. Because my poor wife had to sit here and listen to me talk for 3 hours last night, and I realized I kind of needed to cut down my presentation. So we're going to not talk for 3 hours. We're probably going to talk for about maybe another 45 minutes or so, if I can ever shut up. So anyway, so this is jQuery. Anyway, I'm going to post my website at the end, so you don't necessarily have to write down every link you see. You'll be able to go to it just from the one. Anyway, can't find $. Okay, great. What do I do whenever I want to find something in Visual Studio and it might be out there on the internet? I don't know what the heck it is. Anyway, so I heard it. NuGet. Oh my goodness, it's NuGet. Who uses NuGet? Who doesn't use NuGet? Oh no, I missed it. Okay, manage NuGet packages. Online, NuGet.org. Now, jQuery comes up the first page. What I'm going to type is jQuery. You think I've typed this before? jQuery def. That's not def like, like what we would say back in the day, like cool, but definitions. So here it is, definitely typed. And again, there's a PowerShell script that the really smart people that are behind the Definitely Typed project wrote, where they will periodically script the Git repo and compare all the different folders and then create a NuGet package automatically. So generally these are up to date within, well, this one says the 22nd. So I guess it was published yesterday. That's pretty good. So anyway, I'll go ahead and install that. And all it's going to do is, jQuery one is pretty good. Put a, let's see here. It's going to put a typings folder. And then there's going to be a jQuery folder. And then there's going to be jQuery.d.ts that gets added to my project. All right. Now, what's in this file? Oh, there's comments. That's good. It's a nice start. But what I wind up with, if I search for, let's see here, interface, jQuery. Oh my goodness. There's a lot in here. There we go. What I have is the jQuery instance members. So when I type $, here's all the things that I can do. Here's Ajax complete, Ajax error, Ajax end, Ajax start, Ajax stop. So it's all the stuff that you might want to do with jQuery, but it's all documented. And by the way, all the types are in here. So did you know that when you do Ajax send, the parameter you have to pass is a handler, and the first thing is the event object, and the second one is a jQuery XML HTTP request? You might have, but I didn't remember that. Sure enough, with TypeScript, it's automatic. It tells you all these things, and you get a C#-like, in some ways, IntelliSense experience if you're within Visual Studio when you're using one of these libraries, depending essentially on how good of a job the library definitions author did. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say this again, just to see if it picks up the definition. Come on. The Visual Studio is a little funny sometimes in terms of making sure that everything is good once you. All right. So,
You have to reference it or something?
say again?
You have to reference it?
You shouldn't have to. Shouldn't have to. Save that one more time. Did I save the wrong file before? I think I might have. We'll try one more time, and otherwise we'll manually reference it. Okay, so I guess this is what they talk about when the demo goes. So we're going to go ahead and reference this manually. I'm going to go ahead and do // references, and it's going to be reference and path equals. I'm just going to close that off because that's how I roll. And then in here, I'm going to type, what is it? So I'm already in the scripts folder. So I'm going to do typings, JQuery, and JQuery.d.ts. Save that. Let's see if that works.
I'm mistaken. You got preferences misspelled.
Thank you. Refence. Sure, I can. Oh, there you go. One more. Okay. So we'll just go ahead and do reference, right? I did path, typings, jQuery, jQuery.d.ts. And of course, that means that all my errors go away, right? Nope. What happened? That's pretty annoying. I get this error, which, if I zoom in on it, it's a little bit cryptic, but it says, supply parameters do not match any call signature of the target. Could not apply string to argument 1, which is of type number. Now, what's that trying to tell me? Anyone want to hazard a guess? It's pretty literal, actually, if you're a programmer anyway. Right? I mean, so I guess, I mean, because we're all really good at writing error messages, right? That's what I kind of mean, a little self-deprecating humor. Basically, what it's trying to say is, hey, there's a number, and you're trying to stick it somewhere where there's supposed to be a string. Well, that's a problem. Well, is it a problem? Would this work in JavaScript?
It does.
It does. Yeah, it totally works. It's totally fine. And why is that?
Type coercion.
Type coercion. You took the words right out of my mouth. Well done. Coercion. Does that sound like a friendly word? I don't think so. Type coercion. It says, you know what? I don't care. You're a string now, buddy. That's how we do it over here. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to make sure that TypeScript is happy with it. By the way, if I zoom out, I'm just going to do as a test, like // hi. And I'm going to save it. Watch what happened over here. Remember, this is my JavaScript. See how it says hi also? Meaning it came over. But I've got errors. How is it possible that I have errors and it came over? Well, it's because of that error is really a warning is I'm not really sure what it is type thing that I said before. Okay, so be aware that if there are type errors, and I'll try to make sure I keep doing it. If there are type errors, you'll still get the emit, as they say. The JavaScript will still come out the other end. Visual Studio will just be mad at you. Okay, great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fix this. Now I can do price dot, for example, to string, right? And I can call that like a method because I'm good. And that fixes that error. But that's pretty annoying, right? I mean, like, who really wants to sit there? If I had to write JavaScript and I had to go running around my whole code base and doing .toString open close on everything, was that really adding value to my life? And the answer is no, it's not adding any value, right? That's really annoying. Plus, it's going to make my codes bigger, and there's a whole number of problems with this. Well, good news is that the TypeScript team really appreciates JavaScript, and they generally get it. Some might argue they don't, but mostly I would say people would argue that they generally get it. And so you can use normal JavaScript idioms to sort of gently coerce your types. Anyone know how to take a number and make it into a string in JavaScript? The short way to do it? Do quote, quote, plus. And that works. So that must be a string. Because I started with a string and I appended this other thing, and that means that automatically that'll be a string. So that's one way to do it. Or TypeScript has, it's not called casting. I forget what they call it, but basically we're just going to pretend that this thing is this other thing and don't ask, is kind of what it is. I can use this angle bracket and just say any. And that fixes that error. So any is the type where I kind of don't care what it is. And you might be saying to yourself, well, if it's a strong type language, where does that leave me? Well, it leaves you with JavaScript. So if you don't care about TypeScript and you want to make a little section, just be like JavaScript. Go ahead and make things any, and you'll be off to the races. All right, so there's a couple different ways to fix this thing. Okay, So we're going a little long here. So I just want to show you a couple little other things. First is if I hover over name here, or I click on name, pardon me, price. Notice how, just make this bigger and be able to kind of see. Notice how price here and price here got highlighted, but price here and price down here did not. Why is that? They're different variables. You said is different what?
Different scope.
Different scope. So what happens if I do that, for example, and I click on price again? Why did that price still come in? Anyone know? No, okay. So this is something that I learned from working with TypeScript, is that, and actually reading the Good Parts book. But basically in JavaScript, these braces, at least in ES3 and ES5, don't actually do anything. They don't. There's no scope like that. JavaScript uses what's called functional scope. So if you're inside of a function, that is a kind of unit of scope. But just having braces like this doesn't actually do it. Now, when ES6 finally comes out, and probably in a soon-to-be released, maybe they haven't announced it yet, but I imagine that this will be coming out version of TypeScript, there's a declarator called let instead of var. And if you use let, then this type of brace scope will work. So anyway, just a little thing to kind of throw in there for a bonus. Anyway, so that's cool. TypeScript is able to reason about that. And of course, it stands to reason that I can right-click, refactor, rename. That's pretty neat. You can't really do that with JavaScript. And instead of price, I'm just going to call this, item price or something like this. So item.